Hi, everybody. I wanted to talk to you today about some rhythmic concepts. And the first thing we're going to talk about are just the basic note values. Now, when we teach, say, young kids and in beginners, sometimes we simplify this and we say something like a whole note is worth 4 counts, a half note is worth 2 counts, and a quarter note is worth 1 count. Now, that can be true, but it's not always true. So, what I want you to work on is understanding what's always true, because that will make more sense for you. All right, so if we look at a whole note, what we could say is that there are two halves in a whole. So, a whole note is actually worth two half notes. And then we go down to the next value and the quarter note, and we could say, well, a half note is worth two quarter notes. And because there are two half notes in a whole note, then that means that a whole note is worth 4 quarter notes. So if you said that the quarter note is worth a beat, then that is true that the half note is worth 2 beats and the whole note is worth 4 beats. But the problem is it's not always true. But just stick with me for a little bit on this, and I think it'll make sense to you. All right, then we go down to the next note value. If we divide the quarter in half, we could say there are two eighth notes. These are eighth notes right here in the same amount of time as a quarter note. So 2 eighth notes in a quarter note. 2 quarter notes in a half note, so that means there would be 4 eighth notes worth of time in a half note. And we could say 8 eighth notes worth of time in a whole note. So that's how we could look at this. And then we just keep dividing it. And I'll talk about this in another video, but you can use flags or beams. Flags always go to the right of the note, whether the stem is below or above. Now the stem goes up on the right and down on the left, but the flag always goes to the right. Now the next note value, the next smaller one, are 16th notes, and there are 2/16th notes worth of time in each eighth note. So I could play 2/16th notes in the same amount of time that I could play an eighth note, or because there are 2/8 notes in a quarter, I could play 4/16th notes in the same amount of time that I could play a quarter note. So that's what you want to really start to understand is these relationships here. Now, I have a handout here that a friend of mine made, another instructor, John Marshall, and here are all the notes. There's the whole note, the half notes, quarter notes, and by the way, stems can go above or below the note. It's just that when they're on the middle line, they tend to usually go below. When they're below the middle line, they tend to go above the note. Anyhow, we've got quarter notes, and then eighth notes and 16th notes. And then at the beginning here, you can see there is a time signature. So what this is saying, the bottom number is telling me that the quarter note is the beat note, that note right there, and that there are 4 quarter notes worth of music in each measure or between each bar line. So there's 4 quarter notes, but because 2 quarter notes equals a half note, I can have 2 half notes worth of music. That would be the same as 4 quarter notes, or 1 whole note. There are 2 eighth notes worth of time in each quarter note, so that means I could have 8 eighth notes in a measure. And because there are 2/16th notes in each eighth note, I could have 16/16th notes in each measure. And here it is, a diagram for you too. It looks like this. So you see there's the whole note, 2 halves in a whole, 2 quarters in a half, or 4 quarters in a whole, 2 eighths in a quarter, or 4 eighths in a half, or 8 eighths in a whole, 2/16ths in an eighth, 4/16ths in a quarter, 8/16ths in a half, and then 16/16ths in a whole note. There are also the rest that we can look at. So every note value actually has a rest too. So this is a whole rest, and this would be the same amount of time as a whole note. It just means that you're going to have that amount of silence instead of a note. So a whole rest is below the line, half rest is above the line. Here's a quarter rest, an eighth rest is like a 7 with a little loop on it, and then the 16th would have 2 of those loops. If you go to the 32nd, it would have 3. So every note below that 32nd, and then we could have a 64th note, 128th. We just add another little flag there. So 32nd rest would have 3 of these, 64th rest would have 4. All right, let's go back to this. Now here's the other thing you need to understand. A dotted note is worth the original note plus the next smaller note. So on this chart, if I have a dotted whole note, I could take this original note and put a dot by it, and it would add the same amount of time as the next smaller note, which is the half note, which is half the value of the whole note. But it's nice to remember, I think, that it's the next smaller note. It makes it a little bit clearer for students when they're trying to figure some things out that we're going to do in this class. So here you go. You can see that a dotted whole note is equal to a whole note plus a half note. A dotted half note is equal to the original note, the half note, plus the next smaller note, the quarter. A dotted quarter is equal to a quarter note plus the eighth note, and a dotted eighth note is equal to an eighth note plus the 16th note. So this is one of the key reference points that you'll want to work on in this class and learn this very quickly. If you don't understand rhythm, that's usually something in this video that I've just talked about. The next thing we're going to look at, let's just talk about this as long as we're doing it. We're going to talk about time signatures. And we saw the one in the example. So usually you're going to find a time signature at the beginning. The top number indicates how many beats per measure, and the bottom number indicates which note. If it's a 4, then it's a quarter note. So this is just saying you could have 4 quarter notes per measure. If the top number was 3, it was saying you could have 3 quarter notes. Well, I should say 3 quarter notes worth of music. You don't have to just use quarter notes. You could use any combination. So 4 quarter notes worth of music. If we go back here, and the quarter note is the beat note. So I could say, okay, so that's the beat note. This is worth 2 beats. This is worth 4. 2 eighth notes would be equal a beat. So any combination of those and the rest and the dots you could use. So you could say, okay, I'm going to write 4 quarter notes worth of music. I'm going to use a dotted half note because that's worth 3 quarter notes plus a quarter note. That would give me 4 quarter notes worth of music in a measure. Any combination would work. Let's take a look at the homework on page 20 and 21. So the first thing you're going to do is practice drawing quarter notes, or pardon me, quarter rest by tracing over the outline. And so you can do that. I actually have a different way to do this, and that's how I do it. So I do it a little differently. You can trace what's in the book, or you can use my way. And then we're going to draw some half notes in the next measure. Now remember, so the half note rest is worth 2 counts, so we can have 2 per measure. And when you make these, you just want to make sure that they're sitting on top of that 3rd line, but not touching the 4th line, because otherwise you won't know what they were. Whole rest, we can have 1 per measure, because that's worth 4. Just make sure that that is below the 4th line. And then you just write in basically 1, 2, 3, 4 on these. It's pretty easy. You can see I can have 4 quarter rest. The next one, okay, you're going to write in the beats. And then you can clap these too. So it'd be 1, 2, rest, 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 and like so forth. All right, and then you just write in 1, 2, 3, 4 here. Each quarter note's worth a beat. The quarter rest is worth a beat. And then put the bar line in. Now the next measure, you're going to have a quarter note, and a half rest, which would be worth a measure, and then put the bar line. So every 4 beats, you want to put a bar line in there. And then at the top of that too, you want to look at that and see, you can see that it's explaining the beats for a quarter note and a half note and a whole note, the notes you're using here. In this exercise, you're missing 1 rest. So you can see I just filled that in. I did this complete one. Each measure, you just use 1 rest to complete it. So if you had 1 beat left, you'd use a quarter rest. 2 beats, you'd use a half rest. And then 4 beats, you'd use a whole rest.